everyone. Welcome from Courmayeur. My name is Roberto Ruffier and I am the president of the
Recording in
observatory
progress.
Laurent Ferretti from the Foundation Courmayeur. On behalf of the Foundation, I would like to welcome you all to this online event for the presentation of the 10th number of the magazine ArchAlp. Right now, as you can see behind me, I am in the library of the Foundation. Please allow me to spend a couple of words on our library. As many of you might know, the headquarters of the Foundation is in the center of Courmayeur, inside the complex of the former Hotel Lange. In this complex, we recently launched the project Courmayeur Climate Hub, funded within the context of the Plan for Recovery and Resilience, which includes the restoration of the hall of the former hotel, recovering the 19th century frescoes. Here you can see some pictures in the slides. And as I was saying, the project involves the restoration of the hall with the restoration of the 19th century frescoes and the creation of a hub, a laboratory, a physical place that should support the development of Courmayeur in the next few years. In the project also involves the creation of a digital library devoted to mountain-related topics. This will complement the library that already exists where I am right now, which has about 3,100 volumes. These volumes are the result of two important donations that the foundations benefited from, coming from the collections of two important researchers from Valle d'Aosta, Laurent Ferretti, whose family donated an archive devoted to mountain tourism, and architect Giuseppe Nebbia, who donated a specialized archive on mountain architecture. As a foundation, we are currently developing and completing a platform that will host the digital library. The library will be accessible online from your computers, laptops, or smartphones, and therefore it can also be remotely accessed. We would like to create a digital library that can integrate texts, audio files, video files with just one output to users within what we call an integrated digital library. The launch, as you can see, is on December 28th here in Courmayeur, and as of January, it will be available online. In this context, we are developing a new set of the quaderni della Fondazione, the digital booklets. They will be publications designed for a digital consultation. In other words, we won't print these documents and then digitize them as PDFs. Instead, we will create these publications thinking of the digital format. The first publications will focus on mountain architecture, and in particular, in January, we will publish the first volume, the digital atlas of the abandoned heritage of buildings in the Aosta Valley. Now, this is a research that we started working on in 2021 in cooperation with the Politecnico of Turin within a wider project on the regeneration of the underused heritage of the Aosta Valley. Also, we're going to have two meetings on architecture organized by the foundation in the next few months. In particular, on the 30th of November in Aosta, we will organize a meeting on pedagogy and architecture. On that occasion, we will hear about the case of the Olivetti colony in Buisson, and then on December 8th, still in Aosta, we'll have a conference in the cycle called Return to the Alps. This is a 3-year cycle of conferences organized with Marco Mulazzani and Francesca Fioricchio. Now, this conference will be titled the waste of free time. The goal is to explore all the facilities used during leisure and free time. Now, today we celebrate the 10th issue of the new series. We follow them all, issue after issue, step after step, within a long-standing cooperation between the Institute for Mountain Design of of the Politecnico of Turin and our foundation. In this process, in this path we've walked together, we have strengthened uh, a conviction of ours, one of the pillars of our work, and that is mentioned in the opening article of this issue. Mountain territories are no longer marginalized, they are no longer doomed to stay at the margins. They are central again. Now, from our perspective as foundation, we can say that in recent years, we've seen multiple tangible signs which confirm this development. These signs, I believe, are present also in the other mountain ranges in the world, as issue 10 of ArchAlp tells, and as we will hear today from the presentations of our guests. To conclude, I would like to thank a few people. First of all, the Ordine degli Architetti, the Register of Architects of Valle d'Aosta, the President, Mr. Sapia, and his staff. As always, they've stood by us in promoting and organizing these events. ArchAlp and its staff for this last beautiful issue and for the work we've done together over the years. All these years have been characterized by a continuous dialogue and stimulating exchange. I would like to thank all the speakers as well. Tonight we're going to go from the Apennines to the Balkans and go all the way to Japan. I would like to welcome and thank all the speakers who have accepted our invitation. And to conclude, I would like to thank Barbara Elise from the foundation, who, as always, have been essential for the organization of this event. Enjoy this meeting, everyone. I know that there are many people who are following us online. Thank you all. And now I give the floor to Sandro Sapia. Thank you very much. Thank you, Roberto, and good evening, everyone. My name is Sandro Sapia. I welcome you on behalf of the Council of the Register of Architects of the Aosta Valley. I would like to thank the Fondazione Courmayeur Mont Blanc, represented here by Roberto Ruffier, for the continuous and rich 20-year cooperation with our organization. Elise and Barbara, thank you very much as well, because they are the real drivers of the foundation. Also, I would like to thank ArchAlp and the staff, Antonio De Rossi, and from the IAM for the opportunity they offer us to present the issues of this publication. We never tire of highlighting how much we appreciate this publication. This is true not only for the experts in the sector, but it's true for everyone who lives in the Alps. Now, this has really become an important reference point to get to understand the transformations and the evolutions in our mountains in the Alps. This publication, ArchAlp, also triggers discussions in our meetings too, and thanks to a meticulous research and analysis work by the authors, every 6 months we read about truly innovative and interesting topics. Innovation is a very important characteristic of this publication. We're always curious to read what you are writing about, and it's always a surprise. So thank you very much and congratulations for your hard and excellent work. To me, this issue is particularly interesting and fascinating because the Alps are not only seen on the local level, but on a global one. You can read a comparison between different contexts at the national and international level. You will find an overview on the world with some examples from the world. Very, very interesting. I didn't know much about the mountains in the Balkans, for instance. The articles present project models of new architectures in the territories that are analyzed. And they look at the various transformation factors, economic, social, historical ones, emphasizing differences and distances between places. So it was interesting to read about cultural differences which do exist. At the same time, though, common shared problems and issues are emphasized. So you can see that even in different mountain countries, we share the same problems, the same challenges. And I think that this is the goal of this issue number 10. One of the shared problem that we need to tackle is depopulation. It certainly happened in the past, due mainly to the harsh conditions of life, the absence of many primary services. Now, that led to an abandonment of smaller villages. People moved to cities, which are more able to meet work, the needs of workers and students. However, something is changing, and we heard it from Roberto before. Some factors are transforming the situation. People care more for nature and the environment. People are looking for a more human society. This is particularly true for new generations. There are also new production systems that they no longer need large spaces and have a smaller environmental impact. Things are changing. Remote work has grown. All of this combined with the less harsh climate condition, this is something that we are experiencing in the last few days. Now, all of this is generating a trend reversal. We are seeing people owning back the mountain. In the past, people would have never even gotten closer to the mountains than they are now. So now we need to be able to seize the opportunity. People are coming back to the mountains, and this is the challenge that we all need to tackle and seize the opportunity. This is something that is found in all the mountain contexts that we've read about in ArchAlp. But we need to find the right trigger that can start a virtuous process to build a sustainable community. Community is the key word. We need economic, social, demographic development, but all of this must be governed with the planning instruments to manage territories. Now, this is a difficult task, and we often complain there's no strategy, there's no planning, and this is what we need to do all together. We need to try and provide a vision to go back to these territories. Of course, we need to ensure the survival of communities, and so it is essential to meet at least the primary needs of a community, say hospitals or connection and communication networks that are efficient and working. This, of course, is absolutely necessary. It is important to provide school, education. Now, these are the basics to live in the mountains. The examples presented in ArchAlp show that a high quality architecture has a strategic role to support the life of mountain communities. But architecture must combine social, anthropological, and cultural elements, bringing them all together so as to offer complex design models that are not only about building beautiful containers. There's more to it. A beautiful building must also be functional and able to generate. I think that we must all have this in mind as a register of architects, thanks to the cooperation for the foundation and also with other organizations and associations. I'd like to thank Simone Cola, by the way. Well, we're all trying to work to raise awareness and offering solutions that can be operational. So this is what I believe we should all do. Thank you all very much. And now I give the floor to Roberto Dini. Good evening. I hope you can hear me. And I hope you can also see the screen with my presentation. Well, I also would like to thank you all. I thank Sandro Sapia for his introduction. He's always very interesting every time he has high expectations from our publication, and that puts us under pressure a little bit. We know that you are looking at us, and we know that many are interested in reading what we produce every 6 months. Also, I would like to thank the foundation for hosting us, and this meeting every 6 months, this webinar is very important to explain the contents of our publication and also to have a dialogue with our readers and with the experts, those who build the architectures that we publish about. And so it's very important for us to meet you all every 6 months. I know many people are following the webinar, and so I'd like to spend a couple of words to give you some context on ArchAlp if you don't know it yet. ArchAlp is an international magazine devoted to architecture and mountain landscapes. It is an international publication because it is supported by a scientific committee involving leading international figures, historians, researchers, architects, landscape historians coming from different countries in the Alps. So not only Italy, but also Switzerland, France, Austria, Germany. And so our list of scientific experts expands every time and it becomes more and more international. Why architecture and mountain landscapes? Well, because this publication was developed by our research center at the Politecnico of Turin called the Institute for Mountain Architecture. Since 2010, in fact 2009, we've been producing research studies and projects related to the world of the Alps and architecture and landscapes in the Alps. Here you can see the different issues of the previous series. These issues are only available online. This was the beginning of ArchAlp, and then later on it evolved into a paper printed version, the one that you can see here. These are the covers of the printed publication, but you can also find it as an open access publication on the website archalp.it. As we heard several times today, we have now reached issue number 10, a very important milestone for us. It's not easy given the lack of resources and few staff that usually we have at university and in the world of architecture. It's not always easy to close the publication on time, and it's not always easy to find interesting and contemporary topics for all our issues. For these reasons, every time we try and focus on specific topics. Each issue follows a fil rouge. Issue number 1 gave an overview of the different relationships between mountain regions and architecture production in different regions. looking at France all the way to Slovenia. We then had several issues devoted to the mountain heritage and how contemporary architecture draws on cultural references found in our historical heritage. We also focused on the architecture of the 20th century in the Alps, especially issue number 3. We had some issues devoted to the development of architecture as a support for local communities and new economies. Issue 1 focuses on regeneration, number 5 on architecture for production. And then other issue focus on the environment. This last issue to celebrate our 10th issue, we've gone beyond the borders of the Alpine Convention, and so we've gone beyond national and European borders, looking at all the mountain ranges in the world, looking for the current experiences of contemporary architecture. This was a challenge because we knew what we had in mind, but we didn't know whether this exploration would have yielded interesting outcomes. So it was a bit of an experiment, but and it has confirmed a few things, but it's also surprised us, and we hope that if you read the publication, you will also be surprised and have the same feelings. I'll just scroll through the issue very quickly. Unfortunately, we don't have all the authors of this issue. We've selected a few that we believe are quite interesting to give you an overview of the whole topic. We look at many countries in Europe, but also outside of Europe. So we reporting on the United States, South America, the Nordics, and we go all the way to the mountains in Japan. Here you can see a map of the projects presented. Also, the issue is subdivided into themes. By looking at contemporary productions of architecture, we've identified 3 main topics that we believe cover the different approaches. The first one is regeneration. I know that the first speaker, Adelina Piccone, will tell you more about it. It is very, very important in the Mediterranean in particular. We'll have a focus on the Apennines and central Italy, and we will see how contemporary architecture is one of the drivers of a new vision of these territories so that they can be inhabited again. We've explored places like Sicily, Sardinia, and even Corsica.
Esplorazione è quello legato al paesaggio.
Another theme is related to the landscape, and I'm now referring to Northern Europe, US, and Japan, where contemporary architecture is related to the landscape with a strong environmental and natural connotation. And here you can see Sofia Nannini on the mountains of Northern Europe. A very interesting essay by Yujin Hirase, whom we have the honor to host later from Japan, and then a study on Chilean mountains in Latin America, and another one on contemporary architecture in North America. And finally, one last topic, which was a little more complex, in this issue is about memory. So we thought that in some mountain areas in Europe, for example, the Balkans, Eastern Europe, the topic of contemporary architecture today is extremely complex, that combines so many different aspects connected to the historic peculiarity of these areas, a kind of crossroad of so many different historical streams, and it still connotates the current production, architectural production. So it ranges from Croatia, Albania, Bosnia Herzegovina, Croatia to the border, up to the border of Poland and Slovakia. At this point, I'd like to give the floor to our first speaker, Adelina Piccone. She doesn't have any slides, and that's why I just leave the cover of her essay on the screen. She is Associate Professor of Architecture and Town Planning Projects. She carries out a lot of field work devoted to inland areas, and so she's an expert of regeneration for southern Italy and the Apennines. The floor to Adelina Piccone. Thank you very much, Roberto. Thank you all. Thank you first and foremost for inviting me to publish an article in this issue of the magazine, which opens up to different contexts compared to its more original ones. Well, this opening doesn't come by chance, I think, at a time where the complexity of a number of interconnected events is increasingly highlighting the need to set up relations, connections between different contexts, and follow thematic networks, if not territorial networks. The different contexts of the Apennines, the Mediterranean, and Europe to re-inhabit small villages. Well, actually, this is an in-depth reflection on a number of challenges that I daily tackle in my work, as Roberto Dini just recalled. The Master Arind is a master that is about to start its 5th edition and deals with inland areas and small towns from within these territorial communities and experimenting relations with the community, with the environment, so as to implement processes that are regenerative processes. So it's a master on architecture and design and tries to, it's aimed at investigating the role of architecture within processes, and even if architecture succeeds in triggering regenerative processes. Well, undoubtedly, some pilot cases are showing that, both in Italy and in the rest of Europe. Well, mine is actually a critical reflection, the one proposed in the paper. Why is it critical? Because opening up to other mountains, for me, living and working in the Campania region, meant reflecting on the condition of belonging to southern Italy. of course, we all inherit the so-called southern heritage. And of course, we all know of the particular mission of the Mediterranean. It's reported by the news every day. From the conceptual viewpoint, I never considered that the marginalization of small towns and villages in inland mountain areas, I always excluded a close connection with the so-called southern issue, because it's actually felt in so many different contexts and not just in the southern part of Italy. It also applies to other European contexts or to Northern European contexts, which are actually heavily affected by marginalization and depopulation. So it was important to keep it open, to embrace a larger context through an in-depth analysis. Though recognizing personalities as Rocco Scodellaro and Monsidoria, who played a very important role in their studies and with their studies. So I'd like to emphasize that some conditions affecting our country, as the National Recovery and Resilience Plan, for example, which is actually impacting small towns and villages in Italy. Well, let me just take a step back from my critical assumption based on differentiated autonomy, based on what is happening through the definition of performance essential levels by the government that do not seem to be connected with the space, with the territories, with the communities, despite the role that they will play. So I consider the so-called Southern Italian issue as a different issue within this set of topics. For example, there was a recent book about the specific conditions in Calabria, which actually echoes this type of topics. However, maybe in the wake of studies which are part of my cultural background, leading me to know what it means to live on the northern part of the Mediterranean, the northern coasts of the Mediterranean. Well, that leads me not really to go back to a focus on the disadvantages of southern Italy, the so-called southern issue, but rather to reflect on a new condition for the Mediterranean, which would invite thematic connections, thematic networks, including the Apennines and the Mediterranean, but also the Alps. Well, this vision was embraced by Fondazione Appennino as the basis, the possible basis for a new research, expanding these principles and the room for action to a research that embraces the whole of the Mediterranean. And this Mediterraneanness cannot be considered as the transposition of the past and just stick to Brodello's historic categories, or, I mean, a Mediterraneanness which conveyed as a myth in architecture, which was relevant to the architects of the modern age. However, instead, I refer to a Mediterraneanness which can lead to visions of transformation, of greater relations between the different countries, maybe through digitalization, to ask smart questions to the machines and to artificial intelligence, which are entering our life and our knowledge systems, to help us understand how to put into practice transdisciplinary and trans-scale projects. We need to know these contexts better and in a more dynamic way, so as to weave relations, so as to weave territorial trajectories over and above and dropping our tendency to set boundaries, as demonstrated by Znaje and Znajo, sorry, which continues to show a type of planning that sets footprints, boundaries, which identify juxtaposed areas. Who doesn't have differentiated boundaries for ZPS areas? And I could, add another 20. Whereas a new vision, a new concept of territorial transformation, rather than setting boundaries and fences, should draw up lines which can create commonalities and parallel development. And thinking in terms of this new principles, the leading actor of architectures of the architectures reflected in the magazine, well, it's really the context. That's why I put the term context in the title of my paper. I wanted to convey a transdisciplinary view, different perspectives, with a view to aiming at a revival of the context. So I often associate this to the notion of context as by Saintayo Bina in his book on landscape, associated to a text, a book that combines a layering of different meanings, processes, substances, which connect the life of human beings and not just human beings, so non-human beings and places too. Now, these architectures can convey the idea of these contexts as the images at the bottom of the essay by two two photographers from Campania. They entitled them Inner Landscapes, and they always look at the context. They always cast a gaze on them and on the presence of man, which is never the leading actor and is never stable, but is always a kind of moving presence. Apparently, in these towns and villages, and this is really very clear in this issue. So focusing on it leads to experimentation, to innovation. It opens up to dimensions of experimentation which would be impossible in other territorial contexts, entrepreneurship, internationalization, possible bonds and connections between different territorial networks. So with the Mediterranean, between the Mediterranean and the Apennines, including the Alps and Northern Europe, all of this finally looks possible. In architecture, after the disaster in Campania, I'm referring to the earthquake, when people thought, well, it's enough to invest in building new assets for automatically see people moving back to those areas. But then we became aware that the word reconstruction is not enough. We should instead use the word regeneration. And often architecture, as some of the architectures described in this magazine, I'm referring to the Aquilonia House of Culture. I mean, what they are able to do, they can be architectures which interpret the need for regeneration. In many cases, regeneration processes are coordinated by architects who no longer deal with projects about open spaces, buildings, or even the landscape, and the many forms of reuses, whether temporary reuses or not, or technological energy ones. Now, by virtue of the interpretation of the contexts and the landscapes, these architectures set up processes. They invite co-design with the community, becoming the actors of the actions themselves. And the architects often become the, let's say, the owners of these actions. Hence, a new figure of the architect, a regenerating or regeneration architect. And I think it's part of the education of architects. The good thing about architecture is that it combines the humanities with the hard sciences, stimulating embracing relations, stimulating innovation, new theories, thanks to the special ability to conceive spaces. And often, all of this is, of course, animated by passion. One last thought before closing goes to Riace and to the happy ending of these past few days, thinking of this very passionate person who launched regeneration projects against any bureaucratic regulations. Thank you.
Grazie Adelina per
Thank you very much, Adelina, for your presentation. I hope you can still hear me. We are perfectly on time, and thank you very much also for sticking to the time allotted to you. Webinars must be rich in content, but also dynamic at the same time. So thank you very much. Now, let's move to another country. We have Alexander Ostan, so we're going to move to the other side of the Adria Sea, and we are going to give him the floor to tell us about his essay. As I mentioned before, the exploration in the Balkans through the authors that we involved was very interesting. Alexander Ostan was the, director of a collective work. We've involved many researchers who studied from different individual perspectives and different approaches, areas that are very different. In particular, I'm referring to the essays by Dario Kristic on Bosnia-Herzegovina, Andrej Stekovic on the mountains of Serbia, and finally, we have an essay by Robert Jonathan Loher, who focuses on the mountains in Croatia. We asked Ostan to critically interpret all these different territories. In his writing, he explains that when you talk about the Balkans, you actually talk about very specific cultural and environmental areas. These are countries that are at a crossroad of different cultures between the East and West, the North and South of Europe, and the Mediterranean. And even today, the architecture and the urban transformations and architectural transformations in these areas carry with them these deep differences and these peculiarities of the different cultures behind them. I am particularly happy that we've invited Alexander today because he's been working with our editorial board for many, many years, and he's been doing so with a lot of passion. And he's not only the author of this essay, but he is a very important reference scholar east of the Alps. Alexander has a very intense professional and cultural life in Slovenia. He has an architectural design studio in Ljubljana, and he combines his profession with his life as a researcher and professor at the Faculty of Architecture in Ljubljana, where he teaches history of architecture. Now, I give him the floor. Thank you.
Roberto, grazie.
Thank you, Roberto. Before we launch the slides, I would like to welcome you all and thank you for inviting me here. I will now switch to English because my Italian is not that great to make the entire presentation in Italian. I apologize for this, but I will now switch to English.
Grazie Roberto e anche the whole team of ArchAlp to invite me. I will try to make a short presentation about what has been published in the last number of ArchAlp, number 10. I used to, as Roberto said already, I used to write on the Alpine history of Slovenian architectural traditions to the modern times some years ago, I think in the first number of this modern version of ArchAlp, the renewed version. And now, since I was asked to cover the Balkans, I accepted. Am I able to move the slides myself, or how will we do it? Can you give me this kind of a device to, I'll see if, no. So I'll have to give you a sign. We had some problems with sharing the screen, signs to move on. I have some images. You see here the image, topographical one of Europe, which you know well. See this eyebrow, beautiful eyebrow of the Alps. We in Slovenia are part of this southeastern part of the Alps, the Julian Alps, the very north of ex-Yugoslavia. We are culturally belong to Middle Europe, to let's say Austro-Hungarian Empire, to Italy, to Venezia, Giulia, Friuli, etc. On the other side, in the 20th century, after the First World War, we were reconnected to the southern countries that established after 1918 the Kingdom of Serbs, Croats and the Slovenes. I'll tell you a little bit about the history to be able to read this better. But you see also the other mountainous regions of Europe and the enlarged Europe. You see Anatolia and the movements towards the very east. But you also see in the middle, I mean, stretching down from Slovenia in direction of southeast, the Dinaric Mountains. I can't, you probably don't see my mouse, but if you see it, it would be good. Can anybody see it? Probably not. No? Anyway, and then moving down to Macedonia and to other mountains within the Balkan territory. Can we move on, please? Next. Here it's even more exaggerated, the geomorphology of this part of Europe. Next. Next one, please. And you see, not so quickly, I'll back, sorry. One back. You see it here well, in the very angle northwest, it's Slovenia, which shares Alpine regions with a little bit of Mediterranean and the Pannonian Plain. So we are quasi Alpe Adria region that is connected towards Dinaric Alps. You can see this diagonal moving over mostly Bosnia and Herzegovina, which is the heart of Dinaric Alps, and moving down to Pindar Alpine region in Greece already, and northern Macedonia, and what was originally etymology of the Balkans is the Balkan Mountain in Bulgaria, as you can see, between Black Sea and Serbia, which was not really etymologically correctly in 19th century taken as a source for this description of the whole peninsula. And then we have Rila and Rhodops also in Bulgaria and a little bit in Greece. Further. Next.
If you can control,
we control.
You can click on the slide. Click one and another, you can go. Okay, perfect.
If I click on the slide, okay.
Now we see your mouse.
Okay. Now the terminus of Balkan Peninsula is actually not an exact one. You know that Apennine Peninsula is very clearly defined by the shoe form of your peninsula in Italy. Iberian as well has the border. Your border are the Alps. The Iberian border is the Pyrenees, etc. But Balkans hasn't got a real sharp division between north and south. Where does the Balkan actually start? There is no clear definition, and the modern geographers, they don't discuss the Balkans. They speak more in political context about Southeastern Europe. But to give you some examples of definitions, is that the rivers that flow here on this map, you can see it. The rivers, southern part of Slovenia would, in this context, belong eventually. It's southern of Sava. Sava is the river that has a source in Slovenia and flows until Belgrade, where Donava, the Donau, meets it, and then Donava flows further to Black Sea. So these northern areas, northern territories of this division that are defined by the rivers, by this definition, don't belong to the Balkans. And all the southern ones would. But then the Greece is actually more part of Mediterranean, let's say, regionality, and part of the Croatian coast also, or the big part of Croatian coast, belongs to Mediterranean. So there is no clear definition. And even you see the whole morphology of this peninsula, you can't really grasp it as a very clear geographic, let's say, attribution. So we actually more or less try to avoid this in the recent times, but this Balkanization as a symptom, which speaks about all the mostly negative sides of Balkan attitude, which is, I mean, has historical sources, and we'll come to that, but it is connected with corruption, with nepotism, etc. So when you speak about term of Balkanization, it usually shows the shady part of this area that was constantly in fights between ethnic groups and tribes for the territory. And it's mostly mountains, or not really mountains compared with the Alps, but you see this, all the middle, the heart of this region is subalpine or alpine world. Next, please. I'll touch it. Yeah, here is one of the maps that shows the countries, or here, yeah, Balkans, the countries that in a way should belong to it, but Romanians don't want to be part of Balkans at the same time they are, or at least the northern part of Romania would not actually belong. Moldavia also is very northeast and probably not, and the Greece doesn't want the part of the Turkey on the European side, is and is not. So anyway, it's a very, very elusive term, and I think I have a citation here, the next slide, if you go further, by our this very popular and pop philosopher Slavoj Žižek, who in his jokes speaks about definition of Balkans, and we can read it through. But here you can see this Bosnia and Herzegovina is actually the heart of this Alpine region, and I'll focus more than on Bosnia. And the other authors spoke about Serbia, which you see with Belgrade, the northern part being very Pannonic, and the southern part of Serbia having more hills and, let's say, mountains also. And then Kosovo was not covered in this bunch of articles, and Macedonia, North Macedonia also not, but I think you have an article on Albania. Montenegro also had some very nice examples of let's say, traditional architecture, and some newer examples. So we covered in this context Croatia, which is partly, or is in a big way also part of Middle Europe culture and tradition, was also mostly part of Austro-Hungarian Empire, and Zagreb is also a European capital, and the coast has its own character, but it's also religious context. Croatia is still Catholic, Slovenia is anyway Catholic, and the division, Bosnia is already divided. Bosnia is partly Muslim, partly Catholic, and partly Orthodox, while Serbia is Orthodox, Montenegro is Orthodox, Kosovo is Muslim, North Macedonia is mixture of Orthodox and also Muslim, and Albania is also Muslim culture. So very quickly, Bulgaria also Orthodox Church. So there are religious also divisions that define the cultural context of an area and influence everything from anthropological aspects to political ones that play a crucial role then in this context of Baukultur, the cultura di vivere, cultura di building culture. So everything is very much connected. You can't divide an aspect of living culture from the broader cultures, historical ones, territorial ones, anthropological ones, religious ones. Next, please. This is the small joke by Žižek. He says, if you were to ask an Austrian where the Balkans are, they would tell you, well, in Slovenia, that's where the Balkans begin, along with the primitives. If you ask the German, they would say, well, Austria, they had an empire, they are mixed with everyone, they are Balkanized. If you ask the French one, they would say, Germany, those fascists. And finally, the British would tell you that all of today's continental Europe should be considered one big Balkan peninsula, where the Brussels bureaucracy now resides in the new Constantinople, and the British are the only exception. So this is kind of a projections that northern countries usually, in a way, project the Balkanization to the southern always. So you can actually play with these terms in a very voluntary way, but actually is the division is more or less what I showed you with the rivers, that we more or less use under very, very delicate conditions. So there is no clear border. Yeah, we can go on. This is the regional Balkans, a small reach of mountains between Black Sea and Serbia, that the whole Balkans is taking the name from. Now we'll just go quickly through some images to kind of invite you into the scenery of these mountains in the Balkan area. You can go quicker, shortly through, go on. We can go on, just to see that this geomorphology and the landscape, the character is different to the Alps, but it has also resemblances, but in a way it's lower. It has pastures, it has also cultural heritage. Let's go on. So it's on one hand still relatively wild, on the other hand is getting more and more urbanized. And this wilderness, because of the difficult approachable areas, protected it from being too much urbanized in history. So you can have this relatively innocent natural context. We can stop here now. Relative innocent, and then kind of a very intense knots of urbanization, and we'll come to that. If we very quickly make this run through the historic layers, stratigraphy of the layers, we have a lot of prehistoric sites that are very interesting, like this one, which is Lepenski Vir in the Danube. Danube river bed. It's a gorge, actually a bigger gorge, southern of Belgrade, on the border with Romania already, with these settlements in very interesting formal language, with these conic houses that open towards the river, towards, let's say, southwest. So let's go on. There is a museum, open air museum, and a covered part of this Lepenski Vir, but very interestingly, falling down on the terraces. We can go on. And then we have Vucedol, we have Vinca, some other prehistoric sites, also very interesting. Some a little bit better preserved, the others less. This is on Ohrid in the North Macedonia. The pile dwellings reconstructed, but not very scientifically correct. So if you compare that with Fiave in northern Italy, or what we have done in Slovenia recently, our sites are UNESCO sites, and this is a little bit voluntary interpretation. But still, this culture, 6,000, 5,000, 4,000 BC, existed in these areas. And this is the map that shows you this border that historically is very deep and very much defines the mentality and the way of thinking and the cultural affinities of these regions. You see the Western Roman empires with Rome in red, and the Eastern with Constantinople. And the border actually runs, in this case, in the eastern part of Bosnia, today's Bosnia. So this border is actually a very strong, deep determinant in divisions. It was partly in prehistoric times, very sharply in the Roman Empire, and then we can go on. And then in time of Ottoman Empire, that was conquering the Balkans, you know, the Turks came via Constantinople and were actually coming up to Vienna, Budapest and Vienna. And you see the border again in Bosnia, this time a little bit more to the west, and in the southern part of Croatia, ran through it. And it's 400 years of occupations, more or less. So Serbia was the whole under Montenegro, Macedonia, and part of Bulgaria. So this kind of cultural patterns that have colored this whole region are very much part of the broader picture of a culture in which you are entering. So if you are traveling or researching this, you have to be aware about what were the major historical events. And this small and bigger war, at the end, the Balkan Wars in the beginning of 20th century, and then First World War, very much influenced the whole dynamics in also ethnical terms, the mixture of ethnical groups, the mixture of languages and religious. Some historic maps, but we will not go into that so deeply. So you see this Eastern Europe ends with Bosnia, and then southern part of Serbia and southern part of Romania, etc. We can go on. And now I'll just jump in medias res to enter architecture in a more recent context and show some traditional examples. So I think we have 20 minutes. So Roberto, I would ask you to help me with timing. Do I have? No. To not be too late. This is Sarajevo. This is the capital of the Balkan capitals of ex-Yugoslavia. That is the only city that is actually in the heart of the Dinaride Mountains still today. Zagreb is the relatively very north. It has only this Sleme big hill in the north of Zagreb, but otherwise it's mostly in the plainlands. But Sava runs through Zagreb, and the same Sava runs to Belgrade. Belgrade doesn't have any hills, just small, very small hills above Sava and Donava confluence. And Sarajevo, the heart, is the only one that really has these mountains as a big determinative context already. And you can see a 19th century image of Sarajevo, where already a mixture of Muslim or Islam culture and Western culture, which came with Austro-Hungarian Empire, that was here for a long time, can be readable. You can see the verticals of the minarets and the architecture that has this oriental character that rises up the terraces of the valley in which Sarajevo lies. And this was also the very unfortunate situation of Sarajevo between the last wars in the 90s, where they were actually in the middle between these hills, and the occupying armies came to the top of the hills and were bombarding them. And that was a very tragic event, coming mostly from a Serbian part of Bosnia, from Pale, etc. Okay, let's go on. Some old images, so you can understand this nature of the tradition that was coined, that was generated, that was designed by this influence of Oriental architecture that the Turks brought with them as far as Bosnia. So you can see this very typical typology of let's say, smaller urban ensembles and individual typology of the buildings with this cantilevered wooden structures on the upper floor and stony ones in the ground floor. So if you visit Sarajevo, you can still meet, more in a touristic terms, unfortunately, but still meet this traditional Islam-Muslim heart, which is called Başçarşıya, with all these attributes and with a lot of morphology still preserved, arts and crafts and tourism, etc. But around there is already, you have a sharp division also in urban tissue, a sharp division between this Başçarşıya Muslim part and the Austro-Hungarian. So it is even described in the road where the east and west actually meet. And Sarajevo is a melting pot of this meeting of north and south and east and west. And it was not until I think 3 years ago then that this post-war Yugoslav architecture was put on a map of let's say, global interest architecture. Also, when in MoMA this exhibition Toward a Concrete Utopia happened. But this I'm just mentioning en passant to give you a hint if anybody would be interested. A lot of interesting these iconographic themes developed from Yugoslav after World War, let's say, celebration of the very tragic and then also sometimes successful battles in the war, is commemorized by these structural monumental monuments that you can meet all over Yugoslavia. And within this exhibition, this is one of the most interesting parts. That it is mostly in the mountains. So you can see in a territory where mountains are the most prevailing territorial context, also these monuments. Now I'll switch to Roberto. How many minutes more do I have?
Until 10 minutes, 10, 15 minutes.
Okay. I'll start with this Sarajevo story. That's why I entered. A little bit of context is that you probably have heard about Jože Plečnik, who is the architect partly an architect of Ljubljana, who studied with Otto Wagner in Vienna. All the architects from Ljubljana were more or less heading towards Vienna, eventually Venice, some as far as Milano, but mostly the cultural orientation was north and monarchy and Vienna. Plečnik studied at Otto Wagner and then worked with Masaryk in Prague until 1920, and then came back to Slovenia and helped to develop Ljubljana School of Architecture. And then his pupil, Edvard Ravnikar, took it over with modernistic language mixture of Plečnik heritage and Le Corbusier heritage. Ravnikar went to Le Corbusier in the late 30s, so he combined both aspects in a relatively interesting mixture, fusion of personal language, of kind of critical modernism or regional modernism. But to name you, why is this important? Because the pupil of Plečnik, and which has this delineation from Schinken, Wagner, Plečnik, Ravnikar, was also Dusan Grabrian, this guy who in the 30s moved to Sarajevo. He finished the school. He was the first generation of diplom architects by Plečnik, and then moved to Paris to Beaux-Arts school. We can go on. These are just some sketches to show you the culture of this Art Nouveau from which Plečnik started, but then he was moved away. This is also still the culture of the drawings the Plečnik's parliament never realized. But then he moved more towards Italy. Plečnik then became serious and a very interesting classicist in a very original way. And last year he got nomination UNESCO. So Ljubljana, if you will come, it's his major architectural designs, open spaces or buildings are UNESCO. And Grabrian was first generation, and he moved to Sarajevo, and he was fascinated by Oriental culture on one hand, on the other hand by Paris and by Perret and Corbusier. And they were actually following also the impulses of Le Corbusier. And here is where now East and West and North and South meet in a very interesting mixture. We could say after Frampton, this kind of critical regionalism attitude, being part of universal culture on one hand, that is planetary or global. On the other hand, combine it with autonomous cultures from different regions. So Grabrian tried to do this mix, following also a little bit the studies of Le Corbusier, who did this Le Voyage d'Orient, which is also published. And I think you have, I have found a small booklet, a facsimile of his Voyage à l'Orient, combined with travels to Germany in one Electa booklet. It's very interesting, where his sketches and studies are included. So he went as far as Athens and then further to Istanbul, and always sketched and also draw. But these are the top monuments like Acropolis, the Hagia Sophia, etc. But what he was interested even more was this vernacular architecture, the very specific morphology of the settlements and the buildings. So already Corbusier was fascinated a little bit with that and tried to develop some themes in his 5 elements of modernistic architecture from this Oriental architecture that was very open in upper floor and had a very open floor scheme of a ground floor. And he published in the 52 the first book about Bosnian Oriental architecture in Sarajevo, Grabrian, in context of modern architecture. So he tried to do kind of a fusion between tradition. Here is one of the examples, another publication of the same guy who was researcher, and he first taught at the secondary school in the 30s, but then started to help at the Faculty of Architecture, and was more a theoretician and a researcher than a practicing architect. This is Macedonia, where Oriental influence is even more present, and very beautiful books with studies that are done in the spirit of Le Corbusier, a little bit sketches, analysis of ground floor, analysis of sections of facades of the settlements, analyzing also this broader organigram. This is also by Grabrian. You see the roots the dell'abitare is the land and the culture, and all the influences from topography, climate, materiality, techniques, religions, tradition that come into the big trunk of the tree, and then this upper part of the tree is manifested in mixture of this very interesting also toponyms and expressions of Oriental architecture like Kapijik, Chardak, and the cities Charshia, etc. So very interesting in-depth study, and then this is from the working, let's say, sketchbook, how he analyzed this interesting features of the ground floors, the open structure of the living, with this courtyard, with these walls that were mostly also closing this internal courtyard of this kind of late echo of the Muslim architecture, and the morphology, and always writing also and analyzing it. And here is some images from his books. So on the left-hand side is this more central Bosnian architecture with this tent roof typology. On the right, more Oriental part. We can run quicker. These beautiful silhouettes of the old villages that you rarely can see, unfortunately, today, still, because it's this, which is actually the consequence of the lack of, stable political circumstances to really approach the architectural and dwelling culture in a systematic way, and to preserve these beautiful traditions. On the other hand, to develop the further ones out of it. This actually can't happen really consequently within these turmoils of wars and tensions. You have probably heard and seen these tensions in the last month between Serbia and Kosovo, etc. So it is a barrel that can explode if there is no reason and help from Europe. So the Balkans is still, the heart of Balkans, the south, is still torn between Europe and their autonomy and their proudness and their being themselves, and not being open to integrate. Especially Serbia, for instance, is very strongly divided between tendencies of Europeanization and the tendency of being autonomous and having, let's say, a very strong resistance towards Europe, West, America especially. They were bombed also in the 90s, you can remember that. And rather leaning upon Russia with orthodoxy and Big Brother helping them economically, etc., and military. So it's a very delicate situation. So, but I will not burden you so much. But you have to understand it always in this context also. These are some other images from his book, also analyzing settlement cultures, the growing aspect of the villages. You see this Vranduk, beautiful synchronization between landscape, the roofs, the volumes below the white one, and the roofing articulation, which is very specific. And this is what you can still, let's say, find nowadays on some of the rivers. So Bosnia still has some very beautiful spots, but the general image of urbanization is relatively catastrophic. After war in 90s, a lot of still damaged buildings, or this kind of a improvised bottom-up building without profession in the open landscape. The companion of Grabrian was Jura Neidhardt. Grabrian was Slovene, Neidhardt was Croatian. So actually the northern ones coming to Slovenia and helping to kind of invite this also openness of modernistic architecture, westernization, but to combine it with Oriental tradition. So they were also analyzing the programmatic aspects of the cities. And he was more a project-oriented architect, so he was trying with some buildings and typologies that reflect this Corbusian attitude, but try to combine it with this Oriental spirit. So in this way, this is perhaps the most manifesto building up in the Trebević Mountains, a ski lodge that has this tendencies to have a flat roof. It doesn't have it really, to combine stone and wood, to have this big opening windows, etc. So, and pilotis, the horizontal windows, etc. So very interesting. And this is kind of a more suburban example of buildings he tried to develop also with industrial culture, with prefabricated elements, with production that was able to be done within Yugoslavia in the 50s and then 60s. But in urban planning, he also followed. Neidhart studied with Behrens or worked with Behrens in Berlin and then moved to Corbusier and worked with Corbusier. And Corbusier knew that they were also very good drawings, so he respected, especially 9 of the students of Plečnik went to Corbusier, and I think 3 from Croatia and 1 from Serbia or something. And urbanism in Sarajevo was also an echo of this plan libre, the urban Siam attitude of big volumes, like unité d'habitation within Sarajevo, but then adding some local elements, iconography, textures, etc. But you can clearly read this kind of approach to mix the universal modernistic language and some characteristics. Then the reality was more prosaic, so this is still Neidhart, some public buildings, good modernism, but nothing really special, not keeping this regional, let's say, character or expression as far open. Now I come to the pupil of Neidhart and Grabrian, which is Zlatko Ugljan. It's the only really Bosnian architect, but I think a very good synthesis between what was there in tradition, what he learned. He also traveled to Scandinavia. He was in Finland. He met the culture of Alvar Aalto, who himself was not anymore this functionalist architect, only following form follows function, but was open to regional characteristics. So Ugljan, who is still alive but very old already, was studying these roofscapes or reflections of the landscapes in the area. And then his buildings are in the 80s mostly, 70s he begins, but 80s kind of a mixture. He also built some very nice churches. So he built churches, but also a mosque, for instance. His, let's say, formal expression was also very much in research of volumetrics that followed the traditional, let's say, formal language, but that added a very autonomous, artistic, personal addition, which was very much of himself. You see the years in 60s, and the mosque in Visoko, he started in 60s, and they stopped it in a very small village where he started to build, because they said this is not a mosque. And he had to wait, I think, 10 years. The building site was open when an investor came from the east, from the far east, and he found it interesting, and they continued to build it. And this mosque then got Aga Khan Award, and is very nicely integrated into morphology of this small, not that small city of the central Bosnia, which is called Visoko. And it has all the attributes of a mosque, but very much, let's say, integrated in this open, airy, whitish atmosphere of, let's say, modernistic influence. Then he has some smaller hotels at the river, like this Bregava, where this tradition is reflected in a little bit different way. You'll see the roofscape, in a way, is sourced in tradition, stone, stucco, a lot of wooden elements. And you can see here with the hotel on Bjelašnica, which is above Sarajevo, before the Olympics in '84. That was the best moment still in Bosnia, when all the 3 regional entities, the Croats with Catholicism, the Serbs with Orthodox, and the Muslims with Muslim religions, were actually mixed, sometimes also in smaller villages, and used to marry each other. And these hotels are very much interesting also for those times and for this kind of a culture. You can see reflections of northern architectonic culture, but also traditional ones. He was master of treating the wood, also construction. But unfortunately, very much unfortunately, all these buildings, nearly all of them, were demolished in the 90s war, when without any hesitation, the Serbs, in this part of Serbian occupation, demolished these beautiful examples like this Mikulic house. You can see again this big roof that we have seen in traditional architecture, but then this cantilevered attitude between the volume below and the roof, and the open windows, and the elaboration of wood that in a way sometimes reminds us of Japanese architecture also, or the echoes. You see the angle window without support, etc. So I think very, very nice examples, elaborated until the detail. And he was teaching in Sarajevo also, and was professor, and has some students. I think we have one example in this small mosque in a village of the architect Zec. But you can see here also the influence of Frank Lloyd Wright, this big cantilevered structure with bay windows, etc. So I think something what building culture in any region should respect. Tradition on one hand, and universality that is invited from the best examples of modernity. And I think Uglen also in detail succeeded to do that. Roberto, if we are finished with...
Yes, we have 1 minute.
Okay, this is now what you can read in the article. It's the examples Roberto mentioned. Robert Loher from Zagreb, who is himself alpiner also, but also architects, and works with Chamber in Zagreb. He shows these mountains in Croatia, which are not many, but above the sea. You can see behind the Adriatic Sea, there are some beautiful, still untouched natural resources. And he shows in his article mostly this sustainable, very small, delicate things that they are doing with his friends in the mountains, which is the pathways, the reconstructions of the old refugiums, the old huts that existed there already, some bigger ones also, renewal of it, this approach to modernize them within. So it's not about big architecture. There's no big cities in the mountains because they are mostly unpopulated, but also some more recent examples how to define this morphology of alpine architecture in relations to modernity. The other author is Kristic. His photographs this fascinating complementarity of color in the high Bosnian mountains with the remains of archaeological items with their stečci, which are the stelas of the cemeteries. And then let's go further. Yeah, the huts, but the territory being very wild and very specific and beautiful in this raw, untouched way. It has these consequences of the war, also the mines, because the battles also pass this territory. So you have to be very careful, but they will tell you where the front was running. So Dario Kristic also shows a little bit of Neidhart and tradition, but also warns very much about this recent urbanization, urban sprawl, and big investors coming, trying to build cities in the mountains up there, like this example near Bielašnica, that is more or less Torzos, that probably never will be finished. So this kind of investors' speculations with money, etc., is very problematic. Croatia is still, let's say, following the competition's logic and tries to follow this kind of architectural culture, let's say, attitude. Bosnia, very, very difficult. So this kind of just examples that where architects can stretch and do something like this hotel in Bielašnica that in a way respond to, let's say, global trends also in alpine architecture, but are mostly supported by very strong investors from the Islamic cultures like Qatar.
Sander, grazie.
Ok. Scusi, yeah. Finisciamo?
Minuti contati e dovremmo lasciare
We only
spazio.
have a few minutes, unfortunately.
Grazie, scusi.
Well, thank you. Sorry for taking so long. Well, this part of contemporary architecture is contained in the essay you have written. So our audience will certainly find out more by reading the article. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for your very interesting and interesting presentation. Now we have Yujin Hirase, professor and architect from Japan. At the moment, he teaches at Waseda University. He was also professor at the Saga University, still in Japan, founder of a professional studio with which he builds architectural works as well. I kindly ask the technicians if they can launch the recording of his presentation. Unfortunately, due to different time zones, it's the middle of the night in Japan, so we cannot have the professor here with us, and he has kindly prepared a recording to tell us more about his projects and work. He's going to tell us about works of architect Yoshizake, who built in the Japanese mountains, and then he will tell us something about his own works in greater detail. Thank you very much. L'architettura nelle aree montane del Giappone, forme determinate da fattori.
Architecture in Japan's mountainous areas, shapes determined by external factors, the natural environment. My name is Yujin Hirase from Japan. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to contribute text to ArchAlp. I would like to briefly introduce the contents. First of all, I would like to introduce myself. I mainly design public buildings in Japan. I'm also engaged in education and research on architecture design at Waseda University. In 2007, I worked at an architecture firm in Basel, Switzerland, and has a strong interest in international collaboration. Today, I can't explain the detail, but I'm working on a design project with 4 main teams. As part of this research, I am working on mountain architecture research as part of my light infrastructure research. For nearly 30 years, I have been fascinated by architecture built in mountainous areas and have been conducting research and analysis mainly in Japan. Mountain huts located in harsh natural environments often have no decorations due to the harsh nature of the environment, allowing the natural form of the space to emerge as an inevitable figure. There is beauty in such simple and sturdy construction, and the strength of architecture that emerges from confronting the harsh nature. And this is Hakuba Mountain Villa, Japan's first mountain hut. This was opened in 1905 at an altitude of 2,832 meters. It is the largest in Japan with a capacity of 1,200 people. Today, there are more than 170 lodges in Japanese Alps alone. Because of Japan's rainy and typhoon seasons, which bring heavy rainfall, most buildings traditionally have sloped roofs with large eaves. This is Hakubaoike mountain villa. The graved shape of mountain architecture is a natural form due to the climate. The simple exterior and bright red exterior walls and roof contrast with the greeny of the trees. Its dignified appearance in the midst of nature is attractive. This is very famous Japanese mountain hut, Karaso Hyute, designed by very famous architect Takamasa Yoshizaka. It is situated on altitude of 2,350 meters. In winter, avalanches from the surrounding area flow through it. By burying the building in the ground, avalanche damage is minimized. Karasai Hyute, this is surrounded on two sides by a stone wall with a gabion. Gabion is a basket made of woven iron wire filled with borders. Gabion that cannot be buried, giving it the appearance of a stone fort. In winter season, this lodge consists of 3 buildings distributed in a way that reduces the surface exposed in the direction of the avalanche. Therefore, the avalanche passes over the snow accumulation on the roof and prevents it from destruction. This is also designed by Takamasa Yoshizaka, the Tateyama Mountain Villa. This national dormitory stands on the plateau of Tateyama at an altitude of 1,940 meters. The shape of buildings is intended not to obstruct the passage of wind and seems to be inspired by the shape of the mountain behind, but its generous size stands dignifiedly in response to the scale of the Tateyama mountain range. In winter, the roof has a simple shape with minimum unevenness to cope with the wind, and its arched, streamlined line is designed to sweep away the snow. So next, this one is also designed by Takamasa Yoshizaka, Nozawa Onsen Lodge. Accommodation facility located at a ski resort. This shape, the nut-like shape, eliminates the need to remove snow. And the green roof stands out against the white snowy landscape. Snow accumulates on the roofs of surrounding buildings, but snow falls naturally from this building. Inside, in the center of the hexagonal plan, is a spiral staircase that allows to reach each room directly. From here, I will introduce my project built in a mountainous area. So this is Mount Ontake Visitor Center. The 2 visitor centers are located at the mountain site at an altitude of 2,180 meters at the foot of Mount Ontake. And the other village site, and its altitude of 742 meters. In order for the two visitor centers to become a coordinated facility, the architecture of the red roof is proposed as an image of visibility and impression to visitors. By stretching the roof, the mountain area creates a landscape that responds to the scenery of the mountains. Mount Ontake is an altitude of 3,067 meters in the background of this visitor center. This is a mountain site, altitude 2,180 meters, model of the time of implementation design, 9 meter wide by 62 meter long volume. The location of the grand staircase was changed from proposal in consideration of the historic old road connecting the two shrine gates. This is a scenery before construction and after completion. This site in winter season, this area is a ski resort. So ski resort woodland course is over there, and to avoid obstructing the landscape, the building was placed in a long narrow layout, nested against an existing retaining wall. The exterior walls are made of gabion and have a 2.5 meter high kailin that is designed to withstand a maximum expected snowfall of 2.4 meters. The eaves line of the kailin on the exterior wall is high enough to cover the 60-degree angle of incidence of the snow flakes in case of cinder cones. The large staircase serves as an approach from the parking lot over there, and also as well as a place for climbers to rest. This is inside of visitor centers. The exhibition space is a combination of a running exhibitions room in a box where visitors can concentrate on the exhibit, and a sinking exhibition space with a view of mountain. Mountains is framed from the upper part of the wall of the snake cage gabion, and the exhibition was planned to be connected to that location. During winter months, it accumulates considerable snowfall and becomes a snow resort. This is a February scenery covered with about 1.5 meters of snow. This is another visitor center in village site, altitude 742 meters. The models at the time of implementation design, symmetrical trapezoidal roof shape. Considering the continuity of the floor plan with the roadside station right side, a rest space and toilet are placed on the right side. Exhibition space and multipurpose place room are placed on the left side across the grand staircase. This is before construction and after completion. We created a landscape with a trapezoidal room roof, that echoes the gable or roof of the adjacent roadside station, creating a sense of unity. This is a view from the opposite bank of the river. The grand staircase frames an impressive view of mountain. A semi-outdoor plaza is created under the roof of the grand staircase to provide a place for visitors to relax. Exhibition space, 7-meter wide space, is supported by wooden crutches that gradually change to match the roof shape of the trapezoidal building. Next project. This is a Gokayama Cross Base. This is a sightseeing base facility next to Gokayama Dam in Fukuoka Prefecture. It's a very big dam. Large curved shape that correspond to the curved embankment of the dam. The parking lot and roof terrace are smoothly connected with stair and slopes, creating a landscape with a sense of unity where the landscape and architecture are continuous. This is a pergola space. The left space is a cafe, right space is a shops for outdoor things. This pergola invites your gaze to the dam lake. The louvers made of natural wood were shaped to match the mountain range to become a new symbol of the Gokayama area. Last project, this is a hut tent project. A hut tent is a small 2.5 meter by 3.5 meter mountain hut designed as a shelter for mountaineers and a base for forest maintenance. We designed a system that can be built in a short period of time by combining a new construction material. The name is square panels. Square panels designed to use Japanese standard of wooden pallet for transporting goods to be installed in place where it is difficult to build or transport them. This photo is a square panel. It's a 1.1 meter square panel. While conventional wooden buildings produce a large amount of waste when demolished, they can be reused as pallets for logistics, making it possible to drastically reduce the amount of waste. Water stopping performance is ensured by using a tent membrane with excellent waterproof and weather resistance on the roof and exterior walls. Being translucent, such membrane becomes highly visible at night, gently diffusing light like a lantern. Moreover, they are easy to install in places where transport is difficult, such as mountains or remote island where transport costs are high. A variety of uses will expand the possibilities of future hut, such as mountain climbing, evacuation huts, temporary disaster shelters, marshes, and saunas in open spaces. This project was a prototype developed as part of a joint research project to propose a highly design-oriented and innovative mobile architecture by integrating the various know-how of experts in wood experimentation, building material development, tent membrane development, branding, and architecture design with university research. Thank you very much. Bye.
And back from Courmayeur, we have a short time at our disposal. I'd like to thank our presenters. Their presentations were so interesting. And let me invite participants to really browse the magazine. It's truly worth, not just because of the rich content, but because it truly provides a vision of realities which are unknown to us. So they are really and truly very interesting. Now, at the end of this journey, at the end of this exploration, let me give the floor to the director of ArchAlp, Antonio De Rossi, for his conclusions. Thank you, Roberto. Good evening, everyone. Just a few minutes to draw the conclusions since we are moving closer to 2 hours of live meeting. Let me tie on what Roberto said. It was very important for us to have an issue on other mountain ranges and not just the Alps. We didn't want it to be a sort of self-referential representation of the Alps, so as to say, you know, that they are the most, the wildest mountains, the most intact mountains. So, well, actually, other mountains, the Apennines mountains, and the inland, I mean, the mountains of Sardinia, and then the Balkans, and Japan, and the Americas. Well, this is a broader landscape that widens the panorama, and in the future, due to the vertical translation of landscapes determined by climate change, this is bound to play an even more important role. Undoubtedly, the mountains then become more fashionable than in the past. They receive much greater attention. And I think this must be connected to climate, economic, and social changes. So these are new opportunities on the one hand, as well as opportunities for experimentation for architecture. For an architecture that must be highly sustainable, of course, and very closely connected to a new vision of how the economy and society are correlated to the environment. And while we can see on the screen images of the papers published in the magazine, I'd like to recall ArchAlp, a great French expert with his wonderful architectural visions applied to Pila in the Aosta Valley and San Sicario in Piedmont. And he paid great attention not just to the Alps, but to other mountain ranges all around the world. He was able to read both the differences and the similarities. His representation by Laurent Sapir of this sort of high altitude universe, which in a way was connected altogether connected. I think this is the vision behind this issue of ArchAlp, and it's also an imperative for the future, so as to be able to tackle the very tough transformations ahead of us in the next decades. I think we should have a clear view and a cultural vision, the ability to design in these places. That requires a long preparation, a specific preparation, not just a technical one, a one that can embrace so many different aspects. It is an articulation of different places, of different communities and mountains in the world. Let me thank all the participants this evening, Professor Picone, Professor Osta, Professor Hirase, and of course the Courmayeur Foundation and the Society of Architects of the Aosta Valley, with whom we have shared a path for a long time. And of course, I'd like to thank all the people who listened and participated. And by the way, our 10th edition can be accessed for free at the website of ArchAlp. And you can also buy it. You can also buy the paper, the hardback version from the site, and you can also get a subscription. Thank you all and have a good evening.
Grazie, buonasera.
Thank you. Good evening to you all.
Grazie. Buonasera, buonanotte. Thank you. Bye.
Grazie.